they're here already. In the wake of the UK's first Al-Qaeda convictions, we expose the terrorist links in Britain and how the UK has become their European headquarters. Al-Qaeda UK, a Dispatches investigation, Sunday at 9 on 4.
Since 1978, it's charted the ups and downs, the comings and goings in the pop world. 4 celebrates 25 years of smash hits in an hour. But first, do you believe in magic?
Angels and elementals of the West, we ask for your power and protection within our circle this evening. Element of water, be with us.
In a house in Essex, 3 women are about to cast a spell. They hope it will improve their performance at work.
This evening. Element of earth, be with us.
People will take power which is normally considered scientific power into their own hands. And this has led to a rather strange revivalism of paganism and witchcraft.
We're now ready to work.
This is the white magic of modern suburbia.
Goddess, bless this spell for us, that the magic may happen. Spirit of air, earth, fire and sea.
The supernatural and everything that is summed up, everything that's evoked by that word, supernatural, do have a powerful attraction over my imagination and that of many other people. It's undeniable. I suppose part of that is might be a remnant of the time when we were living in caves and had to be afraid of the dark, because the dark was full of nasty, great big things that might come and eat you. And your life was controlled and set about by powers that you didn't understand, and which, if you managed to placate, you might be able to, keep from eating you just yet, or at least not until next week.
We now remove. Working success for each of us 3. As we will it, so it be. Doing what we do celebrates being an individual, and it does meet a very deep spiritual need.
We've come a very long way in external terms, but not so much a long way in internal ones. We've still got the same kinds of brains that our ancestors had 30, 40, 50,000 years ago.
And like our ancestors, we are still searching for answers beyond the confines of reason or science. Welcome to the postmodern world.
Ambitions reached and realised. See new horizons before our eyes. Our working lives will now run smooth. All obstacles are now removed. Success at work for each of us 3. As we will it, so it be.
Author Philip Pullman illustrates a paradox of modern life. Anti-religion, pro-science, but living day in, day out with a powerful sense of magic. One scene in his hugely popular trilogy, His Dark Materials, is based somewhere along this busy highway round Oxford. In this mundane setting, his 12-year-old hero cuts a hole in the air with a magic knife and steps into a parallel universe filled with witches, fairies, and armoured fighting bears.
I suppose it would be an easy thing to accuse me of, to say that I'm a rational person who exploits the irrational in order to sell lots of books. I'm not rational at all. Rationality is something that I admire very greatly, that I use whenever I can master a little corner of it. But I'm really not very good at it. I'm about as good at being rational as I am at playing the piano. If you compare the number of things I know to the number of things I don't know, and this is true of all of us, of course, what we know is the tiniest possible little pinprick of light surrounded by a vast and illimitable darkness, which contains all the things that we don't know. But then when you come closer, as with a camera, and you come closer and closer, this little pinprick of light gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it finally expands and it fills the horizon. And this is where we are. This is all the things we know and all the things we have experienced and have learned and can find out. And nowhere in that circle of light is there any evidence of God, for example. I can't see any evidence to believe in God. So in this little circle of light, I am rational. But then you come out again, you realise how small that little circle of light is compared to all the things that you don't know.
Millions of people share Pullman's enthusiasm for a world beyond the little circle of light. Is that escapism, folly, or just a fundamental part of being human?
Although there are enormous resonances between the different parts of our lives, actually we move between spaces where the local rationalities simply would not fit together if we were asked to give a coherent account of everything we do in our lives. I think that almost everybody lives in many worlds simultaneously. One should be very impressed by how contradictory social conduct so often is. No doubt there is a kind of dream that one should live a fully self-consistent, fully coherent life, but I don't think anybody does.
Jupiter is in the 11th house, the house of hopes and wishes, and the house of large groups, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which is connected to foreign countries.
Astrology is a perfect example of this contradictory behavior.
To do with possibly foreign countries and new groups of people, and there's a great chance that you'll get your wish, whatever it is at the moment, and we're opening up a few doors. No guarantee.
As science explains more and more about the way our universe operates, astrology, once so popular in medieval England, is still thriving.
Now,
For evangelists of science, that's a depressing state of affairs.
is your Jupiter, the planet of good
I
fortune.
despair of the fact that astrology and similar nonsense is so popular. I despair of the fact it's been pointed out that astrology books outsell astronomy books by some large margin. I find that just sad, because the magic of the stars, the magic of the galaxies, is there in the astronomy books, and more is known about it, obviously, than at any time in the past, but much more is known about it than at any time in the past. Words fail me when I try to think of the sheer dullness of what astrologers do when you compare it with what's out there. And if you're suggesting that there's some need in the human mind for that kind of thing, it's a misunderstood need. There's no wonder, there's no mystery, there's nothing wonderful at all about astrology.
Maybe not. But that need for mystery, for magic in our lives, does seem to be an instinct people cannot quite deny.
There's a very, very intense side to you which people don't immediately see. But when they get to know you, they know that you're a force to be reckoned with. Now, Scorpio...
It is an expression of a sort of hunger for something, I think. A hunger for connection, a hunger for the sense that they are connected to the universe in some way that isn't only of short duration, isn't only scientific. They want to be connected in a meaningful way. They want a story about themselves and their place in the universe. And all these things give them a bit of story which they can put together and make into a meaningful whole. And if it makes them happy and it keeps them from going crazy and it preserves a sense of connection with the universe, I'm not altogether against it.
It's a question of survival. A child born in this country, in this century, is luckier by far than his ancestors. Life expectancy has been extended, our vulnerability to passing disease reduced. But whether the benefits of science make life more sustainable on every front is an unresolved argument. The supernatural factor remains stubbornly resistant to its own extinction.
I think that religious belief, in the sense of belief in a supernatural intervener, a supernatural interferer, is actually pernicious to the scientific enterprise, because it teaches people to be content with, to be satisfied by magical explanations rather than to try to understand what lies behind the magic. If you've been brought up from childhood on to believe that at any time spells can be cast, miracles can be done, God can intervene and whisk people off to heaven or heal the sick or violate the laws of physics, then I think that is, I was going to say consciousness raising, I suppose I should say consciousness lowering. I think it does have an effect upon the mind which is negative with respect to the great enterprise of science, which is to try to understand.
Someone who has made the journey from religious belief to skepticism is Don Cupid. In the 60s, he was an eloquent exponent of the teachings and philosophy of the Anglican Church. But the more science explained, the harder he found it to believe in a God who had supervised the creation of the universe and the destiny of the people in it.
We don't have the language any longer to say what God is. I can quote the old slogans of the philosophers of the past, but nobody knows what they mean anymore. We no longer know how there can be an infinite mind, how the entire universe can be unified in a single, simple intellect, all the chaos and complexity and vastness of the world and of life.
So in this vast modern world, constructed on reason, Don Cupid's former faith crumbled. He saw no rational evidence for life after death, and fell out of love with the teachings of his church. Instead of believing in the supernatural, he now takes intense delight in what is real and concrete.
We already live in the last world we'll ever know. You'll never know anything better than you've got now. You'll never have a better day than today. You no longer look to any future event. You no longer look to a past golden age. You no longer expect a life after death. You're just intensely focused on now. You pour yourself out into life now. You shouldn't in any way suppose that the religious sphere is something other than all this around us. All this is all there is, and it's what we have to deal with. It's what we have to make a life out of. That's it. You should live as the sun does. The sun lives all the time by the same process by which it's dying all the time. You should live like that. And that's true religion. True religion is not preparing for the Last Judgment.
But Cupid's message is too stark for most people's tastes. To test the nature of belief in Britain today, researchers went to Kendal in the Lake District. What they found in this ordinary country town was a population who wanted something spiritual in their lives, but didn't look for it in church. Linda Woodhead uncovered a vast array of self-help groups, all devoted to personal happiness.
We found 125 groups and one-to-one practitioners who are offering alternative therapies that, when we asked them, they defined as spiritual. And they've all got this self-conscious sense that what they're doing is spiritual. And the whole point about this new form of spirituality, the reason people feel more comfortable in it, is because it's not dogmatic. It's not saying, I've got the truth, I'm absolutely certain about it, and I can tell you what it is. I suppose the bottom line is it allows people to acknowledge that there's a mystery, that there's a kind of magic behind the everyday world or the world that science can tell us about.
The difference is that the church comes at me with a lot of beliefs and programming, where when I come to this place, it comes from within me. My own beliefs and truth emerge rather than being told. I'm finding more about myself and what's true for me in this life.
The big loser in all of this has been the traditional Church of England. In Kendal, just 1 in 10 people attends church with any regularity. Although nearly half believe in what they describe as some sort of spiritual life force, only 1 in 5 actually believes in God.
Now that indicates that something really quite dramatic has happened, that Christianity has become the marginal, the countercultural belief, if you like, whereas the mainstream belief is now this vaguer, holistic, alternative sort of belief.
This new landscape of belief in modern Britain has echoes of a distant past.
My hands pick up where there's pain in the body. Quite often get a pain in my hand when I'm working on somebody when there's an area of pain. I sense it as a rush of heat and tingling to my hands, first of all, and then a deep sense of peace. So I'll begin behind
Faith healers are like the cunning folk of medieval England. Part doctor, part priest, part magician. They touch the parts modern medicine cannot reach.
So if I'm not actually touching you, I haven't left you. I'm with you all the way through. I might just be working on your energy body rather than touching your physical body.
Energy is a very, very important word. Getting in touch with the energies of the world, of the earth, of the mother, Gaia, the cosmos. You center on something. You can control cancer, you can control AIDS, or you can control some eating disorder, or you can control love life. All sorts of things when you're feeling cut off, to give you the power that has been taken away by modern science, by modern bureaucracy, by modern developments, by them, and allow you to take this back into yourself and to be your true self, to see the body as the temple.
So at this point, if you want to visualize letting go of anything you no longer need.
There is a feeling that the days of the white heat of technology as the popular panacea for everything are never going to materialise. And that then leaves that part of us which wants something else.
And amid the monuments to materialism and technology, there has been a flowering of another religion, environmentalism. To some, of course, the issue is strictly scientific, how to preserve nature from the depredations of industry. But others see the growth of environmentalism as a link with the days when everyone worshipped nature.
In many ways, English culture continues to identify itself not with finance and industry, but with a kind of natural deity, so that the colour of God in England is certainly green, and the Ramblers Association is at least as important as the Church of England in terms of spiritual institutions in this country, with the National Trust occupying the function of the Archbishopric of Canterbury.
One of the most important trends since the last war has been the recognition that this planet of ours is finite unless we care for it. I think that that awareness has been hugely important for the kind of spirituality that we have today, which is much more an emphasis on creation and creation spirituality and the sacredness of the planet, and seeing that salvation not in terms of personal salvation, but in terms of the cross for the world, the cross for the planet.
This is a chilly spring night in 21st century Edinburgh. The half-naked crowd is celebrating the old pagan fertility festival of Beltane.
Being up there on the hill for Beltane, it's an incredibly primal experience. Connecting with the elements, it's something that I think is essential to the human spirit. It's a celebration of the fact that, you know, after what sometimes seems like such a wasteland of winter, you know, that the magic, the incredible miracle of everything springing into life again.
This is the spirituality of a consumer society, located according to taste, in nature, a faith healer's hands, or the inner self. Magic is not done for in modern Britain, nor is worshipping God in some form. But where did it go so wrong for the established church? In the First World War, British forces endured death and destruction on a terrible scale. Soldiers found they had little control of their lives and were left longing for the sort of protection that neither their guns nor their generals could give them.
soldiers in the trenches in the First World War rediscovered the sense of constant fear and danger that their ancestors felt in the Middle Ages. The number of Bibles which were carried around that had bullet holes through them because they became lucky totems. I mean, these are the sorts of things that Chaucer's pilgrims carried around with them. And there were all sorts of rituals and practices that people adopted. Robert Graves, the poet, believed that his virginity kept him safe in the trenches.
As the death toll mounted, the established Church of England, with its rational approach to human destiny, found itself less popular than the Catholic Church.
Catholicism has always been better at handling death than Protestantism. It has a much more concrete sense of what the good death is, and Catholic priests in the First World War were appreciated by soldiers because they had things to do when men were dying. They crawled out into the lines to anoint men, to give them absolution. The eloquence of the gesture of anointing all the senses as the senses give up, the surrender of your sight and your touch and your taste and your hearing back to God as you die, is an incredibly strong and comforting symbol. It turns something that is happening to you into something you can do. And that's a very eloquent turning round of death.
The rituals of Catholicism carried a clear message. There is life after death, and you are about to enter it.
Protestant clergy, by and large, didn't anoint people, didn't give them absolution, and so found themselves without any very clear role at these crisis points. In fact, some of the clergy felt that their only point of access to the soldiers was by going around with packets of cigarettes.
When those soldiers returned home, they found a Church of England reeling from the experience. A royal commission was set up to find out why the church had proved so out of touch. Its conclusion? That people were fed up. Not with God, but with institutional worship.
Working class people had become alienated from the church, partly because they lived in very large communities in which traditional structures no longer had meaning and in which, in many cases, the church was very notably absent. But also partly because the church had often sided with the bosses. It had identified itself with the status quo, with the establishment, and so many working people felt alienated from Christianity for social and political and economic reasons, as well as whatever, if you like, purely internal spiritual reasons they might have had.
The Church of England felt that it had failed to a great extent to provide the services needed in the World War. But I think it blamed itself unfairly. I think its anxiety, its commission of inquiry, was part of a general feeling of failure of institutions after World War I. After all, what had been a century and a bit of extreme optimism and sense of runaway progress had ended in a human catastrophe of unprecedented dimensions.
Human needs do not change much with time.
It's once again a pleasure to come and hopefully serve the spirit world tonight and try to bring you evidence that there is no death but life everlasting. Okay. All right, why do I want to go there? Right.
After the carnage of the First World War, spiritualism boomed.
Coming up, which is not a full year in the spirit world, I know.
3 generations on, people in this audience are hoping they will receive a message from someone they've lost. It's not that many of them aren't churchgoers, but they want a direct experience of the supernatural that rational religion doesn't offer.
Well, spiritualism has a great flowering in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, but what really propels it into the forefront of English religious life is the First World War. Of course, the scale of human loss in Britain in the First World War and the immeasurable emotional impact of that makes it quite easy to understand why people might step outside, but not necessarily totally reject, the formal practices and constructs of the church and actually look for some deeper kind of meaning or emotional support through spiritualist seances.
All right. I'll tell her. Right. She's talking to me here about an anniversary time that we've just come past, or we're just approaching. We're very, very close to the anniversary of someone else's passing. Hold on a second.
In the relentless reality of modern life, death is the moment when the question of a spiritual existence can be no longer avoided. The medium at this meeting says there are spirits out there, and he can make contact with them. External evidence is not the issue.
Because that's where the lady's taking me to, because she must have been in and around that area in her life.
I have to say, there's absolutely something in this. I don't know what, but I do actually believe that there is another world, and that, for me, that's quite a nice knowledge to know that when I die, actually, this dies, but not the spirit inside.
All right, and I know it's Jim. I've never met your husband physically, but I've met him from the spirit world before. But I know he's coming here. You moved the music, or you moved the records?
It's nearly 12 years since I lost my husband, but it's nice to know that he is around.
And he's saying he'll be with you in spirit, okay? And it's short and simple, but it's just to say that they're there, okay? And
people, especially in World War I, are losing those who are near to them suddenly, horrifically, traumatically, and finally, in many cases, they cannot even bid ceremonial farewell to their bodies. And the spiritualist medium is there to reconnect. It's a rite of passage, in many ways, to go to a medium, to take the place of the formal funeral, lying in, and deathbed scene.
If religion had been found wanting when the First World War ended, it was science in the dock after the Second. The equation between scientific progress and moral good, which had informed the Enlightenment, was suddenly brought into question.
For about 200 years, that's from 1700 to 1900, the idea was fairly set that the world is a mechanism. In other words, it acts like a clock or like a steamship. And what you do is you find out how it's put together, where the bolts are, you work out the laws of stresses and strains and relation, then you can build a better world. And this idea reaches a climax in the mid-20th century. And then it goes to pieces. It goes to pieces morally because the destructive effects of big science become increasingly apparent. But also it goes to pieces conceptually. Instead of seeing the world as a mechanism, chaos theory, quantum physics see it far more as a process of ebb and flow, in which the irrational has a much greater role to play than had formerly been thought.
The authority of both church and science was badly tarnished by the middle of the century.
You could no longer assume that the world was evolving in a moral way as well as in all the other ways. There wasn't an obvious direction of good, which there had been. There were still questions that were unanswered. And then science stopped being so absolute.
Most people yearned for something better than the half-century they had lived through. In politics, it meant voting in a radical Labour government to change society from top to toe. But in personal terms, this had become the century of the self. Finding yourself in an anonymous, uniform world became a new religion, a new magic.
The new magic was very close to therapy, the idea that you have to explore yourself. You have to work out how your spirit and mind move together. And by understanding intuitively how you work, you can change yourself, transform yourself to work better with the world. After all, when Freud began separating off the undivided self into id and ego and superego, he was already inventing cosmological terms for things that aren't mechanical, that aren't straightforward, they aren't simple. He was inventing a symbolic science, a magic of the soul, which nobody had before.
By the late 50s, this new generation had come to full bloom. Deference was dying. Class structures breaking down. The young were living by new rules.
Families had been split up. Women were working. The whole attitude in education was changing for starting to think for yourself rather than just learn by rote. You didn't have the same outlook as your parents, and what made sense to one's grandparents no longer made sense to oneself, and certainly wouldn't today to your grandchildren.
By the 60s, conventional religion was in free fall. The more the church tried to match its message to the material world outside, the more people deserted it.
People were feeling that the church or the traditional churches weren't offering the spiritual. They were more concerned with whether the roof was falling in, things that weren't terribly exciting, weren't involving, there were 5 old ladies and no central heating, etc. And because of this secularization, there was a feeling in certain quarters that talking about God wasn't quite in.
Time magazine even speculated on God's demise. To be an atheist was to be in touch. Anything else seemed slightly soft in the head. On the face of it, we were liberating ourselves from superstition. But another way of looking at it was that our spiritual life was being neglected.
Sometimes I think, Freud had been alive in post-war Britain rather than in 19th century Vienna and had been looking at young middle-class students. It wouldn't have been sex, as with the Viennese matrons, but it would have been spiritual repression or not allowing exploration. And you can come down to breakfast in a hall of residence and say who you slept with the night before, but you're not going to come down and say the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to me last night. So people were having spiritual experiences or spiritual yearnings, and there wasn't the context within which you could discuss it, or even the concepts with which you could discuss this.
It was fun while it lasted, but far from dispelling the yearning for whatever lay beyond reason. The super-rational, super-hedonistic decades which followed would only make it stronger.
It's after Do You Believe in Magic?
Philip Pullman's books are tales of magic and fantasy, far removed from our modern technological world. Pullman himself is as rational as the next man, but still sees an important place for magic in our lives.
It's a difficult, complicated business to be a human being. But one thing that the storyteller has to do, it seems to me, and it would be a sensible thing if we all did it perhaps, is to acknowledge this and to not to expect people to be consistent entirely all the way through in every aspect of their lives. I frankly admit that I'm superstitious. I don't believe in it, but I do have certain little superstitions. I feel uncomfortable if I don't do it. I need to have little things around me when I'm writing, that sort of thing. I always perform a little ritual when I see a magpie. It's invisible, you wouldn't notice it, but it's going on.
Irrational beliefs are enshrined in every culture. The question is whether they are unhealthy relics from our ignorant past or an essential part of how we negotiate life.
To follow Christ means dying to sin and rising to new life with him. Therefore I ask, do you reject the devil and all rebellion against God?
I reject them.
Do you renounce the deceit and corruption of evil?
I renounce them.
Do you repent?
300 years after the Enlightenment brought reason to religion, Christian families still have rituals to cast out devils. But the minister in this church, Alan Walker, believes there is more to this than ancient custom.
I think we're only now just beginning to realize the extent to which England remained an enchanted country in terms, or an enchanted culture, in terms of beliefs which have been called magical and so on.
Harry Alexander, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
On a social occasion like baptism, many people in the church will hardly be listening to the words. But a literal belief in the devil is not dead.
Strengthen you by his life-giving spirit.
In 1978, so many people were scared by the film The Exorcist that the Bishop of Exeter set up a commission on ghosts, poltergeists, and the paranormal.
On a first reading, it looks like you're being presented almost with a manual of how to deal with the variety of ways in which the devil misbehaves in England in the 1960s and 70s. I think looking more closely at them, it's fairly clear that explanations were being sought in social and psychological factors. But of course, they still had to leave room for the fact that Orthodox Christianity does recognize the existence of a spiritual world. I mean, because if it didn't, it wouldn't be a religion anymore, would it? You cannot really claim to be a Christian without belief in the devil and evil spirits.
That view is not as unusual as it sounds. In the 1980s, this Sussex village became the centre of an extraordinary story, showing how strong belief in the devil still is. Unemployed decorator Derry Knight persuaded the local rector, an evangelical Christian called John Baker, that he'd reluctantly been trapped in a satanic ring. The God-fearing Reverend Baker was persuaded that Knight needed large amounts of money to break free.
John Baker always believed the devil was always prevalent in the world, always attempting to corrupt people. And John was so convinced that it almost became an obsession with him to try and get this money as quickly as he possibly could. And in fact, even at the risk of his own health, he was clearly under a great deal of stress and strain.
Not only was Baker himself convinced that he had to rescue Knight from the devil, but so were some of the grandest, wealthiest and best educated people in this quiet country parish. So much money was contributed to saving Knight's soul from the devil that Detective Terence Fallon of the Fraud Squad conducted an investigation.
For 9 weeks, Maidstone Crown Court has heard the bizarre story of what followed. The vicar contacted Mrs. Susan Sainsbury, wife of the millionaire Conservative MP Tim Sainsbury. She was asked for help in the fight against evil and gave cheques which totalled almost £80,000. Viscount Hampden was asked to contribute and paid for a £37,000 Rolls-Royce to maintain Knight's image amongst Satanists. And Lord March, owner of Goodwood Racecourse, added £1,000.
In total, Baker had raised nearly £250,000, but Knight didn't spend the money on satanic regalia. It went on fast cars, fur coats and a playboy lifestyle. Knight was convicted of fraud, but John Baker never stopped believing that the devil had him in his grip.
It really goes to show that if people are genuine believers in religion, and they are then convinced that something contrary to that religion, and we use the term devil, is having an effect, and that they as genuine Christians can do something about it, then they will respond.
The people in the Newick story might look like the gullible few, but for many, that sort of conviction is vital to life, and now fueling a new kind of Christianity, far from the ritual decorum of the Church of England. This religion is closer to the evangelism of John Wesley, or even pre-Reformation Christianity. It's steeped in the supernatural and untroubled by reason.
If you always process salvation through your mind, you will never enter into fuller things in your walk. You must move from a place of cognitive reasoning ability to a place where faith and belief flows through your spirit and not through your head. More Holy Spirit! More Holy Spirit!
It is precisely that tension between reason and belief that the Church of England has struggled with since the Enlightenment.
The Church of England thought that they had to try and somehow reach a compromise to come to terms with science. And so they started chipping away at some of the basic, fundamental, supernatural aspects of the religions. It was a terrible mistake because basically it weakened them. It gave the scientists, of course, a sense that they had religion on the run, while underneath the people were establishing a totally new current, taking popular religion away from these established religions and re-establishing them on a new basis, which would affirm the supremacy of irrationality, which the church had tried to give up.
God of the nations, rise up! God is beyond your logic. If your rationalism could save you, if it could save any of us, we would not have HIV, we would not have cancer, we would not have disease, we would not have major catastrophes, we would not have had 9/11. If logic in the mind of man were enough, we must have help from an almighty God in this hour. The days that are coming are perilous.
I think we made a great mistake about the nature of religion. We believed that religion was based on belief, and that basically, to the extent that science could undermine belief, then religion would have no planks left to stand on. But the supernatural element gives people a basis for commitment, believing in something which can't be confirmed, which you have to take on trust because it's written in the Bible or because it comes from a prophet. You're making a leap of faith, and leap of faith in its principle can't be challenged by science.
We are no biologically different from our medieval ancestors. We're only culturally different. But mentally, psychologically, they had identical brain chemistry and structure, so that the hardware of thinking about themselves and religion was exactly the same. But I think that at certain points of our life, we're reminded that the software is only as good as the hardware, in the sense that it possesses a certain kind of capacity, a certain kind of processing information, which was the same for our great-great-great-grandfathers and will be the same for our great-great-grandchildren. And they will grapple with the same issues, the same fears, in a subtly changed way.
And nothing exposes the software more than the presence of death. It prompts us to ask, what is this labour of life for?
One of the motivations for religious belief has always been existential anxiety about what comes after, and for that matter, what went before. The absurdity, as it seems, that we occupy this universe for 50 to 70 years in the whole total endlessness of time. It's a very difficult idea to come to grips with and to believe that our fleeting consciousness is all there will be and all there ever can be.
To fill that empty space came the ultimate magic, the idea which sold us on Christianity in the first place. A narrative to dispel oblivion.
Religion can be consoling if you fear death. The important thing to grasp as a scientist is that that which is consoling doesn't have to be true. Either it's true that you survived death, or it isn't, and that has nothing whatsoever to do with whether it's consoling or not. I mean, that should be so obvious that one shouldn't need to say it, but it's amazing that one actually does need to say it. Not everybody, by the way, thinks it is consoling. I mean, some people, of whom I'm one, think that living forever would be dreadful. My point is that it doesn't matter what I want. What I want has absolutely nothing to do with what's going to happen. The universe doesn't care what you want, it doesn't care what I want. And I care about what's true about the universe.
It's heartbreaking and devastating. But since we believe that there's a life somewhere, since we believe that he had a purpose in life, that we were not frightened for his sudden departure. So his passing, just like that, has taught us a lesson, and it has made us to be more steadfast and believe in our life hereafter.
And all the glory of man as the flower of grass. The grass withereth, and the flower fadeth, and falleth away, but the word of the Lord endureth forever.
We always want answers, we always want security, we always want direction. And I think human beings really innately don't really care where that sense of security and an enlightenment comes from. If it comes from religion, or it comes from science, or it comes from magic. The important thing is not the individual category or box which they dip into for those things. It's the feeling of satisfaction that comes.
The curiosity of the postmodern world is that the benefits of science, which our ancestors would have called miracles, have not provided the satisfaction we sought. We still need a story to make sense of our lives.
If you want to understand the physical nature of some sort of interaction, the scientific method is a very good way of showing that. But the scientific method isn't a very good way of showing what happens when you fall in love, or when you feel frightened of the dark. There are other ways of explaining those which are better. And they have to do with stories, and they have to do with myths, and they have to do with metaphors too, explaining one thing in terms of another. And religion and superstition and the irrational, the magical, are like that. They're not superior to or inferior to science. There are different ways of explaining human phenomena that science doesn't quite have the means to do.
For good or ill, that's why religion survives, in whatever chameleon form it takes.
I myself think that one of the functions of religion from the very beginning, why it evolved perhaps, was actually to prevent severe, debilitating depression overtaking the human species. I even think that some of the near extinctions which happened to the human species over the last 300,000 or 400,000 years, when the human population dropped down to levels of, let's say, less than 10,000 people left alive on Earth, may well have had to do with the sense that life was purposeless and people gave up. I suspect that what saved them may well have been the beginnings of religious belief far back in history, belief in values over and above individual human lives, belief in truths and in moral virtues, even beliefs in beauty and reason, which went beyond anything which actually had any rational basis to it. And in that sense, religion is an adaptive Darwinian trait.
In other words, we have evolved in such a way that we still need belief as well as knowledge in order to survive. What we believe isn't important. It is the fact that it is beyond proof that makes it durable. It is the magic of survival.
All your favourites in one neat package. Second Chance Sunday on E4 from 8 tomorrow. Next tonight, 25 years of smash hits.